The room was quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar, not peaceful but alert, as if the silence itself was watching. He sat alone without distraction, not chasing clarity yet unable to escape awareness. And for the first time, the absence of stimulation did not relax him. Instead, it created pressure, a sense that something long buried had been given permission to rise. Hold on, before we unlock the real power of semen retention, hit that subscribe button and join our Telegram channel. Link in description. We drop daily wisdom, success tools, and energy secrets only shared there. Don't watch from the sidelines, become part of the movement. He had entered restraint, expecting control, believing discipline would simplify his inner world and reduce chaos. What he did not expect was that discipline would remove the insulation that once softened his thoughts. Without constant stimulation, the mind no longer blurred the edges of memory. And what remained was raw presence, without filters. In the beginning, there was no dramatic transformation or visible reward. There was only discomfort growing slowly, like water pressing against a sealed door. The body felt alert, but the mind felt exposed, as though something inside had been waiting patiently for silence to arrive. Then the memories surfaced, not as vague impressions but as fully formed scenes. Moments he assumed were resolved, returned intact, complete with emotional weight and sensory detail. They did not appear randomly, but followed a precise internal order, as if the mind had been organizing them all along. Scenes replayed with unsettling clarity, each one revealing a moment of hesitation or surrender. The pause before a response, the swallowed words, the choice of comfort over courage, all resurfaced without distortion. These memories did not feel distant or symbolic, but immediate and present. This is the effect rarely spoken about when energy stops spilling outward. When habitual release ends, attention turns inward, and the first destination is unresolved experience. Power does not arrive before truth, because awareness must come before control. Semen retention does not immediately grant strength or confidence. It sharpens perception, and perception removes numbness. Once numbness dissolves, nothing remains hidden, especially the experiences that shaped identity beneath the surface. The mind without constant dopamine fluctuation becomes investigative rather than avoidant. The nervous system stays awake instead of collapsing into forgetfulness. An awake system seeks completion, and completion requires confrontation with unfinished memory. Most men are not emotionally damaged but emotionally anesthetized. Pain is postponed rather than processed, and shame is buried beneath habit and distraction. Over time, this avoidance creates the illusion of stability while unresolved material quietly accumulates. Whenever discomfort arose, distraction became the solution. When identity felt threatened, stimulation softened the impact. When self-respect demanded action, release reset the system just enough to avoid change, keeping deeper memory dormant. Retention removes that anesthesia entirely. The body remains alert and the mind loses its escape routes. What was postponed rises not to punish, but because resolution is necessary for coherence. The brain evolved to complete loops and integrate experience. Without distraction, it resurfaces what was left open. Trauma is not chaos or weakness, but incomplete information stored in the nervous system waiting to be processed. This is why the early phase feels harsh and disorienting. Many expect empowerment but instead encounter confrontation. Memory resurfacing is mistaken for damage when it is actually a sign of integrity returning. Flashbacks are not regressions but signals. They indicate that the system is finally prepared to deal with what was previously avoided. What was delayed now demands attention because the conditions for processing finally exist. Moments of silence during conflict, humiliation disguised as humor, and choices that traded dignity for safety all become visible. These were not isolated events, but turning points that shaped patterns of behavior and belief. Each time feeling was avoided, the body stored the charge. Retention increases internal pressure, not only sexually, but neurologically and emotionally. This pressure sharpens awareness rather than dispersing it. Heightened alertness amplifies recall, especially for emotionally charged experiences. Stress chemistry interacts with memory centers to increase vividness. This is a biological response rather than a mystical one. Ejaculation floods the brain with chemicals that flatten emotional contrast and induce detachment. In moderation, this creates relaxation, but in repetition, it dulls awareness and suppresses unresolved emotion rather than healing it. When that cycle stops, emotional contrast returns. Experiences regain sharpness, and old wounds sting, again, not because they are worsening, but because sedation has ended. Sensation returns before healing does. Sedation ending allows wounds to speak. They do not emerge to harm, but to close. What was avoided now seeks integration so the system can regain coherence. Another layer appears quietly beneath memory, which is identity uncertainty. Many men do not know who they are without stimulation, novelty, or constant release, because identity was built around avoidance. When stimulation disappears, the mind asks a dangerous but necessary question about selfhood. Without distraction, the internal narrative is exposed, and contradictions become visible. The memories that surface often involve moments of self-betrayal. These are moments when personal values were compromised for approval or comfort. The mind highlights these contradictions because unresolved inconsistency creates internal tension. Retention amplifies this tension by removing the release valve. Without escape, the psyche brings these moments into awareness and demands reconciliation rather than repression. This is the point where many abandon the process. Confrontation is interpreted as harm, and discomfort is mistaken for dysfunction. In reality, the system has begun functioning correctly. Growth is not comfort or motivation, but endurance. It is the capacity to remain present while the mind revisits moments of self-diminishment and to resist the impulse to look away. Sustained arousal without release sensitizes perception. Attention turns inward and introspection deepens. Awareness sharpens beyond familiarity, making avoidance increasingly difficult. This inward focus is what therapeutic processes attempt to cultivate slowly. Retention accelerates it dramatically, and speed feels violent when depth is unfamiliar. Yet depth becomes unavoidable once awareness stabilizes. Memories replay because they shaped behavior. Avoidance often begins with a single defining interaction. Validation seeking traces back to abandonment, and overwork often grows from learned worthlessness. These memories are not random or malicious. They are instructional markers that reveal where patterns originated and how current behavior was conditioned. The goal of this process is not suffering, but integration. When a memory is allowed to play without escape, its emotional charge weakens, and the nervous system updates the experience. Observation replaces immersion, and presence replaces helplessness. The individual is no longer trapped within the memory, but stands outside it with awareness. Ancient traditions describe this process as facing inner shadows. Modern science refers to it as memory reconsolidation. Different language describes the same mechanism. Retention increases baseline alertness, allowing emotions to be felt fully rather than deflected. This is why clarity emerges suddenly regarding boundaries, relationships, and self-respect. This stage is not regression, but cleanup. What was frozen begins to move, and what was suppressed begins to release. Processing replaces repetition. Shame often appears quietly during this phase. It survives secrecy and dissolves under sustained attention. Identification strengthens shame, while witnessing neutralizes it. Isolation is common during recalibration. Small talk feels empty, entertainment loses appeal, and stimulation feels shallow. This is not depression, but neurological resetting. As dopamine sensitivity returns to baseline, meaning replaces novelty as motivation, the mind turns inward because it has nowhere else to escape. Memories function as invitations rather than attacks. They request processing rather than avoidance. Response determines whether integration or repetition follows. Returning to habitual release pushes memories back underground with greater force. Choosing presence allows emotional charge to drain gradually through awareness and movement. Nothing is erased during integration. Suppression forgets, but integration transforms. Ownership replaces avoidance, and coherence replaces fragmentation. Over time, awareness stabilizes and presence deepens. The same energy, once pulling attention backward, now anchors it in the present moment. Confidence becomes quiet and grounded rather than performative. Eye contact steadies, the voice settles naturally, and nervous leakage diminishes. A man who has faced his internal archive does not flinch, peacefully. He has already endured his most difficult moments without dissociation, and what once controlled him now instructs him. This process is rarely marketed because it is not glamorous. Magnetism and discipline appear later as side effects. The true work happens upstream in reckoning. Retention does not create power from nothing. It reveals where power was abandoned and allows it to be reclaimed through awareness rather than force. Ancient rites understood this through silence and restraint. Modern life resists it through endless stimulation. When stimulation stops, the psyche finally speaks. If one remains long enough, the internal courtroom quiets and the verdict shifts. Guilt becomes resolve. Grief becomes depth. And anger becomes boundaries. Eventually, the memories stop breaking the mind and begin instructing it. They lose authority because they have been processed rather than avoided. If this video gave you real value, tap the thanks button. Your support helps me keep creating deeper content like this. Every thanks is a spark that keeps this mission alive. Your support means more than you know. This is nervous system integrity rather than moral superiority. A man conserving energy gains the capacity to process his history fully. In time, the flashbacks slow, not because numbness returned, but because little remains unresolved. Silence becomes spacious instead of threatening. What once felt like restraint becomes alignment, and the moments that once broke the spirit become chapters rather than curses.